All right, guys, so we are going to read the next chapter, like I told you, of Matilda by Roald Dahl. This chapter is called The Second Miracle. But before we really get into it, I want to read the first paragraph just to show you what I mean about reading punctuation. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to read the paragraph first without reading any of the punctuation. And you guys see what you hear. You ready? All right. Matilda did not join the rush to get out of the classroom. After the other children had all disappeared, she remained at her desk, quiet and thoughtful. She knew she had to tell somebody about what had happened with the glass. She couldn't possibly keep a gigantic secret like that bottled up inside her. What she needed was just one person, one wise and sympathetic grown-up who could help her to understand the meaning of this extraordinary happening. Wow. I had a hard time even reading it without taking any breaths. And that's what it is. A lot of the times when you're reading punctuation, you're leaving spaces in what you're saying. You're not just reading every word with the same pace. So I'm going to read the same paragraph again, the first paragraph again. This time I'm going to read it with the punctuation. And you see how it sounds different? Matilda did not join the rush to get out of the classroom. After the other children had all disappeared, she remained at her desk, quiet and thoughtful. She knew she had to tell somebody about what had happened with the glass. She couldn't possibly keep a gigantic secret like that bottled up inside her. What she needed was just one person, one wise and sympathetic grown-up who could help her to understand the meaning of this extraordinary happening. Now, if you're anything like me, the second time you heard that, it sounded a lot better. And even more than sounding a lot better, it actually makes it easier to understand what you're reading. Because when you're hearing people talking or you're listening to a story, it's the things that you don't say and the pauses and what they call inflection, the way you pronounce the words. That's what makes a story really interesting when you're reading it. So let's go on again. We'll really get into it now. I know you're waiting to hear what really happens next. So we'll start from the very beginning all over the place. And while I'm reading, you guys take a look and see if you can't hear me reading that punctuation this time, okay? The second miracle. Matilda did not join the rush to get out of the classroom. After the other children had all disappeared, she remained at her desk, quiet and thoughtful. She knew she had to tell somebody about what had happened with the glass. She couldn't possibly keep a gigantic secret like that bottled up inside her. What she needed was just one person, one wise and sympathetic grown-up who could help her to understand the meaning of this extraordinary happening. Neither her mother nor her father would be of any use at all. If they believed her story, and it was doubtful they would, they almost certainly would fail to realize what an astounding event it was that had taken place in the classroom that afternoon. On the spur of the moment, Matilda decided that the one person she would like to confide in was Miss Honey. Matilda and Miss Honey were now the only two left in the classroom. Miss Honey had seated herself at her table and was rifling through some papers. She looked up and said, "Well, Matilda, aren't you going outside with the others?" Matilda said, "Please, may I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course you may. What's troubling you?" Now I'll stop right here because here at the last part of this page right here is something that I really want you guys to take notice of here. It's these punctuation marks. There. Punctuation marks, when I'm reading out loud, those punctuation marks tell me that the next words that I'm going to read are going to be words that one of the characters is actually saying out loud. It's not like the rest of this first page where we know that Matilda is thinking things. Okay, it's down here where people start saying things where your voice needs to change. I know that you liked when I made the voice for remember the witch, the head witch in the Roald Dahl book called The Witches? I know you liked it when I made her voice. And if there weren't punctuation marks in texts and things, I wouldn't know how to make those voices. I wouldn't know when to turn on my voice for each character. So there's yet another thing to take a look at and listen for as I read along. See if you can see the quotation marks and how I read them. Something very peculiar has happened to me, Miss Honey. Miss Honey became instantly alert. Ever since the 2 disastrous meetings she had had recently about Matilda, the first with the headmistress and the second with the dreadful Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, Miss Honey had been thinking a great deal about this child and wondering how she could help her. And now, here was Matilda sitting in the classroom with a curiously exalted look on her face and asking if she could have a private talk. Miss Honey had never seen her looking so wide-eyed and peculiar before. Now, since I made some mistakes as I read up here, I want to talk to you about that too. I promise I'll do better next time. When I made a mistake and I didn't read the punctuation up here, it made it hard. I bet you it made it harder for you to understand what was going on. That's what's so important about reading punctuation. It really helps to make what the story is telling you feel real and be able to understand it very well. So, let's keep going. Oh, also, Matilda had an exalted look on her face. I bet you don't know what that means. Exalted really means just like victorious and pleased with herself. Okay. Yes, Matilda, she said. Tell me what has happened to you that's so peculiar. Miss Trunchbull isn't going to expel me, is she? Matilda asked. Because it wasn't me who put that creature in her jug of water. I promise you it wasn't. I know it wasn't, Miss Honey said. Am I going to be expelled? I think not, Miss Honey said. The headmistress simply got a little overexcited, that's all. Good, Matilda said. But that isn't what I want to talk to you about. What do you want to talk to me about, Matilda? I want to talk to you about the glass of water with the creature in it, Matilda said. You saw it spilling all over Miss Trunchbull, didn't you? I did indeed. Well, Miss Honey, I didn't touch it. I never went near it. I know you didn't, Miss Honey said. You heard me telling the headmistress that it couldn't possibly have been you. Ah, but it was me, Miss Honey, Matilda said. Let's stop right there and go here because I see something. I don't think it really counts as punctuation. I might be wrong, but do you see that word was right there? And if you look kind of closely, it looks a little different than the way the other words look. Was is in italics. And that is when they take the word and they slant it a little bit. They make it, the letters tilt. And that tells you to pronounce the word a little bit differently. Okay, so listen, if I don't see, if that was not in italics, this is how the sentence would sound. Ah, but it was me, Miss Honey. Okay, and now I'm going to pronounce that with the inflection. Listen for it. Ah, but it was me, Miss Honey. Okay, sounds a little different there. Okay, let's keep going. That's exactly what I want to talk to you about. Miss Honey paused and looked carefully at the child. I don't think I quite follow you, she said. I got so angry at being accused of something I hadn't done that I made it happen. You made what happen, Matilda? I made the glass tip over. I still don't quite understand what you mean, Miss Honey said gently. I did it with my eyes, Matilda said. I was staring at it and wishing it to tip, and then my eyes went all hot and funny, and some sort of power came out of them, and the glass just toppled over. Miss Honey continued to look steadily at Matilda through her steel-rimmed spectacles, and Matilda looked back at her just as steadily. I'm still not following you, Miss Honey said. Do you mean you actually willed the glass to tip over? Yeah, Matilda said, with my eyes. Miss Honey was silent for a moment. She did not think Matilda was meaning to tell a lie. It was more likely that she was simply allowing her vivid imagination to run away with her. You mean you were sitting where you are now, and you told the glass to topple over, and it did? And then we got a picture. That's Miss Honey holding the glass. We have to find out why she's holding it here. Let's see. You mean, let's go back over here. You mean you were sitting where you are now and you told the glass to topple over and it did? Something like that, Miss Honey, yes. If you did that, then it is just about the greatest miracle a person has ever performed since the time of Jesus. I did it, Miss Honey. It is extraordinary, thought Miss Honey, how often small children have flights of fancy like this. She decided to put an end to it as gently as possible. Flights of fancy, let's stop right there and talk about flights of fancy. You might not have ever heard of that phrase before. What it really means is just moments when you use your imagination in a crazy way. And so what she's saying is she thinks it's extraordinary, it's really interesting that small children can often have flights of fancy like this. They can often get lost in their own imagination, is basically what that means. So she decided to put an end to it as gently as possible. Could you do it again? She asked, not unkindly. I don't know, Matilda said, but I think I might be able to. Miss Honey moved the now empty glass to the middle of the table. Should I put water in it? She asked, smiling a little. I don't think it matters, Matilda said. Very well then, go ahead and tip it over. It may take some time. Take all the time you want, Miss Honey said. I'm in no hurry. What a nice teacher. She really is gentle, very patient. Matilda, sitting in the second row about 10 feet away from Miss Honey, put her elbows on the desk and cupped her face in her hands. And this time she gave the order right at the beginning. Tip, glass, tip, she ordered. But her lips didn't move, and she made no sound. She simply shouted the words inside her head. And now she concentrated the whole of her mind and her brain and her will up into her eyes, and once again, but much more quickly than before, she felt the electricity gathering and the power was beginning to surge and the hotness was coming into the eyeballs. And then the millions of tiny invisible arms with hands on them were shooting out toward the glass, and without making any sound at all, she kept on shouting inside her head for the glass to go over. She saw it wobble, then it tilted, then it toppled right over and fell with a tinkle onto the tabletop not 12 inches from Miss Honey's folded arms. Now, we're going to go back here and read this because you might have noticed that there was not a lot of punctuation in the middle of this paragraph. First of all, this is a long paragraph, so there's a lot going on in there. But there's not a lot of punctuation. And it really starts with this with this sentence here. She simply shouted. No. And here we go. And now she concentrated. So let's listen to that. See if I can read it with no punctuation, because there isn't any in there. Gotta take a deep breath. And now she concentrated with the whole of her mind and her brain and her will up into her eyes, and once again, but much more quickly than before, she felt the electricity gathering, and the power was beginning to surge, and the hotness was coming into the eyeballs. And the millions of tiny invisible arms with hands on them were shooting out towards the glass. And without making any sound at all, she kept on shouting inside her head for the glass to go over. Whew, that was a long sentence, wasn't it? It was a long sentence. And if this was me now, I'm not trying to knock Roald Dahl, because he's an excellent author, one of the best authors for student kids books. So don't get me wrong. But if this was me and I had written this, I would have put some more punctuation in this sentence. And when you get to be a real good reader and you can read out loud, you can actually find that you can add your own punctuation in where you think it should go, even if it's not there in the text. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to add my own punctuation. After I read this, we're just going to keep going, but maybe as you go along, you can see where the punctuation should be if I was reading it like it is. Okay. And now she concentrated the whole of her mind and her brain and her will up into her eyes. And once again, but much more quickly than before, she felt the electricity gathering, and the power was beginning to surge, and the hotness was coming into the eyeballs. And then the millions of tiny invisible arms with hands on them were shooting out toward the glass. And without making any sound at all, she kept on shouting inside her head for the glass to tip over. She saw it wobble, then it tilted, then it toppled right over and fell with a tinkle onto the tabletop not 12 inches from Miss Honey's folded arms. Miss Honey's mouth dropped open, and her eyes stretched so wide you could see the whites all around. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. The shock of seeing the miracle performed had struck her dumb. That doesn't mean it turned her stupid. Okay, dumb means that you can't talk. She gaped at the glass, leaning well away from it now, as though it might be a dangerous thing. Then slowly she lifted head and looked at Matilda. She saw the child white in the face, as white as paper, trembling all over, the eyes glazed, staring straight ahead and seeing nothing. The whole face was transfigured, the eyes round and bright, and she was sitting there speechless, quite beautiful in a blaze of silence. Miss Honey waited, trembling a little herself and watching the child as she slowly stirred herself back into consciousness. And then suddenly, click went her face into a look of almost seraphic calm. "I'm all right," she said and smiled. "I'm quite all right, Miss Honey, so don't be alarmed." "You seemed so far away," Miss Honey whispered, awestruck. "Oh, I was flying past the stars on silver wings," Matilda said. "It was wonderful." Miss Honey was still gazing at the child in absolute wonderment, as though she were the creation, the beginning of the world, the first morning. "It went much quicker this time," Matilda said quietly. "It's not possible." Miss Honey was gasping. "I don't believe it. I simply don't believe it." Did you hear those exclamation points in there, kids? She closed her eyes and kept them closed for quite a while, and when she opened them again, it seemed as though she had gathered herself together. "Would you like to come back and have tea at my cottage?" she asked. "Oh, I'd love to," Matilda said. "Good. Gather up your things, and I'll meet you outside in a couple of minutes. You won't tell anyone about this thing that I did, will you, Miss Honey?" "I wouldn't dream of it," Miss Honey said. And that's the end of that chapter. Next time you hear from me, we're going to be reading this chapter called Miss Honey's Cottage. That's on page 177 for those of you who might have the book at home and want to read along. Kaylee. Excuse me. All right. I love you, Whaley's class. Take care.